and welcome to 2026. I think I'm just about allowed to get away with saying Happy New Year to everyone. You're all very welcome. Glad you can join me this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are, happen to be. What we're going to be talking about today, let's have a little look at today's agenda. We're going to be doing things ever so slightly differently because, as I'm sure you can expect, everyone wants me to whip out the crystal ball and tell you what's coming this year. But I'm going to do that in a slightly nuanced way. Obviously, want to look at what happened last year. We've got our upcoming annual threat intelligence report, our threat monitor report, just on the horizon. So, going to take a little bit of a look back at 2025, but also have a look at what sort of things we might expect in 2026 without going full Mystic Meg. Appreciate that's going to be lost on a few people, but looking into that crystal ball anyway. Also going to touch ever so slightly on what's going on geopolitically, what that meant last year, and also what that means this year. All sorts of weird and wonderful things going on in the world of geopolitics that are likely to have a bit of an impact on what's going on in the big bad world. As always, this session is being recorded, so if you do need to drop off, you can catch the rest of it, and the link is on there on our Vimeo page. Hello, if you're watching on the pre-recording. Slides, you can have a copy of these slides after this session. So as always, we'll be pinging them over to you, to all of the registrants on email. And these sessions wouldn't be what they are if it weren't for you trying to grill me during the course of the session. So please do use the Q&A function towards the bottom right-hand corner of your screens. I'll take as many of your questions as I can and answer those. And those that I can't, I will endeavour to come back to you at some point, whether it be on the next webinar or in writing. Got loads of you today, which is really, really nice. Obviously, everyone's feeling really invigorated in January, which is good because I'm going to cause you all to do a little bit of work now, if that's okay. I am going to talk about 2025. I am going to talk about what my thoughts are for 2026. But I'd love to get your thoughts as well, the masses, so to speak. So let's see what everyone thinks, if that's okay. I'm going to start with this particular question. Now, it's quite specific, this question, because it's talking about risk as opposed to threats. And there's a reason that I'm going to go this route with the conversation today. So for you folks on the session, what caused the most cyber risk for your organization last year? I appreciate some of you might not be in a position to necessarily answer this, but it'd be good to get a feel for what your thoughts are on that. And there's a reason. I've got 3 particular poll questions that I want to talk through as well. There's a second question that's just popped up as well. So question 2 is, this is looking ahead now. So this is looking ahead to 26. And again, just pay attention to the wording on this one because I'm being devious. Where do you expect the greatest cyber risk pressure for your organization to be in 2026? So not necessarily what the threats are, but this is where the pressure is coming from within your business or within your organization in 2026. There's a few choices there for you. And then I think we also have a third poll, and this is a bit more about threats. So what specific threat types are you more concerned about heading into 2026? So this is a little bit more external facing, perhaps, for everyone. With what caused the most cyber risk for your organization? Fair dues. Quarter of you have said you're not sure. It's hard to say. I'll take that. No problem whatsoever. But in sort of second place, a third party or dependency we didn't fully understand. So really good to see that, I must admit. So we did a bit of a supply chain piece of research back end of last year at NCC Group, and there is lots of overconfidence in people and their supply chains and having the management of them. But you can clearly see here that it has caused problems for people potentially, and certain things that are less well known or less well understood in the organization. Second place, 19%, a known risk that wasn't prioritized in time. Again, interesting there that's something that's come up. Completely new unexpected threat in second to last place, and then a control we believe was already in place. What I find particularly interesting about that, and I'm not doing this deliberately, I promise, but in some of my slides coming up about 2025, um, I talk very clearly about the fact that 2025 wasn't anything new. There were no new real threats. There were no new novel techniques that appeared, but a lot of it was just repetition of things that we've seen in the past. So interesting to see that completely new and unexpected threats is relatively low down on that risk score there. So looking ahead to 2026, where do you expect the greatest cyber pressure to be for your organization? 35% of you have said AI-enabled fraud or social engineering. 29% third-party and supply chain dependencies, 15% identity and access management, and then 12% governance and decision-making under uncertainty. And then in last place, cloud and SaaS complexity. So again, really interesting there to see where the AI-enabled fraud and social engineering is being that risk pressure. And again, these are sort of the things in this list are less external facing. They're not traditional threats as we would describe them. These are more internal controls, I guess. I dare to say these are the opportunities for threat actors to have within the organization. So AI enabled fraud, obviously things like CEO fraud and business email compromise. I imagine this is in relation to, and also social engineering, those phishing emails, deepfake, voice cloning, that type of stuff. And then, of course, control over our third-party supply chains. What's the onboarding process look like? What does the due diligence look like around that? And also offboarding as well, which I've mentioned a few times as well. And then how do we marry up those opportunities with the actual threats that are presenting themselves? So what threat types are you concerned about? So threats to your third-party and supply chain or compromise of those things. AI-enabled fraud and impersonation, identity compromise in third place, nation state and geopolitical cyber activity down there in fourth and 16%, and then ransomware. Interestingly, less of you concerned about ransomware, which I think is probably the right thing to be thinking. So the big threats, as we've seen in the last year, and no doubt will be moving into the next year, will be around the mass collateral impact that can be had if your supply chain is compromised. We saw lots of examples of that last year. But I guess for the people who have done this, I mean, I don't know what you've picked in poll 2 versus what you picked in poll 3, but one thing I think is worth trying to take away from this is understanding that poll 2 is around what concerns you have about the opportunities for threat actors within your estate, and poll 3 is about what's happening on the outside. What are the threat actors doing? And this is where I just wanted to touch and remind people about what threat is and how we measure threat. So threat is a measure of the opportunity within an environment for a threat actor to target you, their objectives, so their motivations, and the capability that they have as well. And you can't have threat without opportunity. And what we found last year is that risks and these lovely big news items that happened last year, where risk emerged because of the opportunity that threat actors had. And 2025, in my view, was a year of expanding opportunity. Organizations grew, lots of regulations were coming in, there's been lots of change, there's been lots of geopolitical upheaval. But fundamentally, the threats haven't changed. The bad guys, the nation state actors, they still want to conduct espionage and potentially sabotage. Cyber criminals continue to want to make money. They are financially motivated. They continue to use ransomware in terms of their operations, for example. So their motivations didn't change, and to a degree, their capability hasn't changed all that much, apart from maybe leveraging artificial intelligence a little bit more. But the opportunity has grown, and as organizations have clearly fallen foul of certain incidents that we've seen in the last year, when you look under the hood, some of those things are around our supply chain. They are around our identity and access management. They are around not identifying the gaps within our environments that we might want to. So some of the strategic messaging that I'm going to be putting out this year is less about talking about the motivation of threat actors. It's less about talking about their capability, but I really want to try and help organizations, our clients, myself, in fact, understand what the opportunities are within their environments and your environments, in fact, in that sense as well. With that in mind, and sorry for being a bit preachy on that, but really useful for me to see what people's views are on those polls. Just double quickly checking the questions. Robert Turner, surprised the legacy systems weren't on any of those queues with the demise of considerable of OSs from support schemes. Fair dues. Yeah, probably could have added another one in there. I'm limited to the number of items that I could put on those polls. Legacy systems continues to be an issue within organizations. Generally speaking, when it came to compromising organizations and certainly some of the IR cases that we were involved in and what you see from public reporting, legacy didn't come up all that much, although it is obviously still a significant risk within a business that needs dealing with. Surge, not really a question, but for me, it was the exponential growth of risks, vulnerabilities and breaches that I find harder and harder to keep up. Yeah, and that's fair. The sheer volume of things and what to prioritize and when to prioritize it. So absolutely. And then last one, Keenan, just while that one's popped up, how has TI's discovery of the TA Silverfox link tracking panel helped us better understand how the threat actor operates, and how can this insight be used to improve future detections and defensive measures? So yeah, I think, Keenan, you're referring to some research that the team and other members of NCC Group conducted in relation to Silverfox. So this is just helping understand how SEO poisoning, I think it was off the top of my head, is leveraged. It's certainly not a new technique, but it gave us some real insights into how certain groups operate. We did include some behavioral details in there around the TTPs leveraged by the group, so that can obviously be used within your detection environments. But also, if this is leveraged for incident response type cases, if Silverfox was linked to a breach within an organization, having some understanding of how they operate and how they've breached the organization, you can do that sort of forensic response to it and work out where that happened and when it happened as well. So how exciting was 2025? So from a threat intel point of view, and I guess from the position that I sit in and how we view 2025, there were lots of things in the news. There were lots of big old items in there. Lots of big organizations were compromised. I'm not going to name them. We know who they are based on what's happened. But fundamentally, those incidents, and despite the impact, they weren't driven by new threats or threat actors or necessarily new techniques. They were the same thing over and over again. But again, harking back to my point, the opportunity is what's certainly grown. So things like credential theft, social engineering, abuse of trusted access, those sort of identity related factors that could lead to a breach are what caused the problems, but they've been causing us problems for years and years. Sorry, my Teams messages are going off behind the scenes. I need to turn that off. So the difference wasn't necessarily the innovation of threat actors. It's much more about how organizations were interconnected. Certainly, we saw a lot of breaches of third parties, which impacted multiple organizations. Ransomware groups were certainly very were very successful off the back of targeting SaaS platforms. We saw that with Clop back in March and April time. All of the stuff with Scattered Spider as well was certainly very, very relevant. And then living off the land techniques that were employed by APT groups became very clear. Less 0 days. There wasn't all that much talk of 0 days, but living off the land and these basic fundamental things that I guess we sometimes take for granted within our environments, what had the big impact in the year. These small control gaps don't stay small. These small weaknesses or these very vulnerable points have led to big scale incidents. And kind of what I was talking on my last slide, actually, I've sort of over talked myself. But those third-party integrations, those SaaS solutions, those gaps, those things that we take for granted within our environments. The due diligence when we've onboarded a supplier, the assumption sometimes is that everything is okay. When we do threat hunting within our environments, we hunt the things that we know about. We don't necessarily look for the gaps, which is what's really important within those things. And again, this comes back to some of the resilience testing that we can potentially do or should be doing as part of our security posture, focusing on our response and making sure we identify those gaps where possible. Using good threat intelligence, of course, whether that be operational TI, whether it's more tactical stuff, using IOCs or behavioral threat hunting type campaigns. Another thing that sort of came out very clearly during the year was that threat actors took their time to understand their victims. So we've seen evolutions, particularly in the cybercrime space, where we went from the idea of big game hunting about 5 years ago, where a lot of the targeted criminal activity was against big fish, so to speak. So large financial institutes and so on and so forth. As those organizations started to build resilience, whether that be driven through regulation or just decent budgets, there was much more of a move to more sporadic, spread out targeting of organizations, particularly within the ransomware as a service space. But what we've seen over the last year is that certain ransomware operators or cyber criminal groups have taken their time to understand who they want to target and how they want to target them. So again, we look at the stuff over the summer with targeting of retail and aviation. Scattered Spider were very, very good at conducting that reconnaissance against their targets. They knew who they were going to pretend to be when they're calling these help desks. They're doing their due diligence about the tech that's being leveraged within an organization. We've seen lots of forums behind the scenes talking about the best and worst defensive capabilities within client environments, within organizations, and being given ranks. So a lot of time has been taken by threat actors and cyber criminals in particular to understand who they are targeting, what those businesses have in place from a cybersecurity point of view, and looking for potential behaviors that they can exploit as opposed to those technical controls as well. But what this has meant is doing all of that legwork beforehand means that the impact is swift when an environment is indeed compromised. So as defenders, it doesn't give us as much time to respond in some cases, which is why it's really important, and I'm going to touch on the things to focus on, is around identity and all of that external attack surface and what we look like from the outside in, because that is being leveraged against organizations and very successfully as well. This is a little bit of a biased quip, but threat intelligence has been there and it has indicated these things have been going on, albeit at a strategic level. And I guess to one of my points around the polls, I'm glad to see that it scored where it did based on my sort of assertions before coming into this session. But some of these risks are known, some of these threats are known, and unfortunately they get deprioritized or they get forgotten about or they get left alone. And as a result, these incidents do happen. And it's appreciated that organizations are having to do this massive balancing act, but this is where threat intelligence can really support. It's not just telling you about everything, it's where you can prioritize, and hopefully organizations can leverage threat intelligence to help do that and build business cases and help prioritize those things, because we've seen now that they do lead to incidents and that they do lead to big impact situations as well. I think that's 2025 generally speaking, but what's it mean for ransomware? Well, I've not put my numbers up this month, but we're just doing the final dotting of I's and crossing of T's in terms of our ransomware data for last year. I can give you some rough numbers. We've seen approximately a 20% uplift in the number of victims of ransomware incidents in 2025 compared with the previous year. And if you'll remember, 2024 was an uplift as well. So that trend has continued. We thought it was going to level off a little bit, but it looks like around a 20% increase in the number of ransomware victims. And that's, of course, based on our usual calculations of victims that have been published on so-called leak sites. In terms of targeted sectors, the industrial sector was overall the most targeted sector in 2025, closely followed by consumer cyclicals. Within that space, obviously includes retail, but large IT MSSPs and construction were some of the two biggest areas, as was financial services and off the top of my head now, because I'm not looking at my notes because they're on another screen, was government activity as well. So lots of targeting of local and central government across the globe. So those numbers are going to be coming out in a bit more detail, but some high level themes that we've seen. Absolutely, we moved away from encryption. So very few ransomware operators are focusing on encryption and availability of data. The majority are now leveraging the theft of that data and the publication of data to leverage extortion. So protecting that data is absolutely vital. Having backups, yes, is absolutely still something that's worth having in mind, because encryption is still happening, and knowing what you have stolen is really important as well. We know that downtime that comes from a ransomware incident, whether it be an organization pulling the plug and then having to rebuild, or whether it be building up that reputation again, that's what is causing that business impact. And again, we've seen that through organizations during the last 12 months. These huge periods of time that it takes to recover is having a massive financial impact on organizations. And that comes in part due to lack of resilience testing and running through those scenarios. So being well prepared to get yourself back up and running is what really drives that impact. That shared services piece. So again, SaaS solutions, managed service providers, and those sort of third-party relationships is where we're seeing that big impact. So the huge spike that we saw earlier on in the year by Clop, targeting file transfer solutions, the stuff that we've seen with Scattered Spider targeting TCS, has had a massive impact as well. And we know that we only need to target one organization to do that. We also saw, was it this year? I'm sure it was this year, the NPM library, and the impact that had impacted things like organizations like CrowdStrike and others. So those quick wins that criminals can have by targeting a small thing that lots of us leverage will continue to be a massive focus. And I've already touched on that effort that is being made by criminal groups to understand an organization before compromise, and the means a faster compromise and less dwell time and quicker impact as well. I've talked to this to death, so I'm going to skip over this one, but you will see it in the slide deck when we share it. But obviously, that supply chain compromise is the big driver as well within organisations. So what is going to accelerate into 2026? What are we seeing so far already? What did we see developing towards the back end of 2025? I forget whether I said this in November's session a long time ago, but I genuinely think that the front line for organisations in the following year or so is going to be identity. What we've seen, whether it be a ransomware actor, whether it be an APT group, whether it be a hacktivist group, whoever it might be, one of the leading causes of breaches that we've seen in the last 12 months has been as a result of identity-related issues. So that's exposed credentials, tokens that are found in a GitHub repo, whether it be someone oversharing details on social media, such as LinkedIn. Those bits of information are being leveraged by threat actors to be able to compromise organizations. Couple that with MFA, and MFA in some organizations not being deployed universally. It only applies to certain systems or certain data sets. Then there's the idea of MFA fatigue, and we saw all of the different mechanisms by which MFA fatigue could be leveraged. Even sort of stale and old service accounts, understanding what you have within your environment is really important. Understanding what privileges those accounts have as well is really important. And again, through some of the work that my team do, we see these service accounts in GitHub repos and code repositories that are all publicly available as well, and they are still live and active accounts. Then there's obviously the details of or the situation with cloud and SaaS expanding, and that's going to expose visibility as well of these user accounts and credentials and how those things work. So I genuinely believe, and this is a Matt opinion, that identity is something that organizations should absolutely be focusing on over the next 12 months and looking to prioritize these things if they're not already in place, because they're easy wins for threat actors. And it doesn't really have to be a very capable threat actor to be able to go and find some of this information. So monitoring for leaked credentials, reviewing your source code, and whether that's on GitHub repos and things like that is really very important. And use MFA as well as much as humanly possible. So if you can prioritize something, make this one of those things going into 2026. And then, of course, AI. What are we going to do with AI? We know that this is no longer a case of training sessions teaching your staff to look for typos in an email. This isn't just bad grammar. This isn't even, to a degree, looking at the email address that it's coming from. It takes an awful lot more effort to spot social engineering, whether it be a phishing email, whether it be a phishing call. A lot of the traditional sort of advice and awareness that has been put out about social engineering is kind of defunct. So I'll make sure that we share the link, but we've provided some advice via NCC just before Christmas, because we know that social engineering increases before Christmas, loads of scams and spam, but also some really good advice from our physical security team here at NCC about how to spot voice phishing calls and how to do those relevant challenges. So some really good advice there on that. And obviously looking to try and support organizations understand the potential threat that is going to come from AI, and particularly when it applies to social engineering. There are some solutions that are out there that claim to be able to spot some of this stuff, and I'm sure they're very good. And taking that in hand with good user awareness is really important as well. So yes, AI-enabled social engineering is going to be incredibly scalable and is going to cause an awful lot of headaches for organizations, especially coupled with the identity as being one of the key issues as well. Take those two things together, and it's lots of easy wins for cyber criminals. Lee, when do we think quantum threats will come, this year or next? That is a crystal ball question, mate. Lots of talk about this one. When do we think it's going to take place? I'm not going to pin my colours to the mast and say this year. I don't see that happening personally. I hate this when I commit myself to something like that, and it's bound to happen now. But I don't see it happening this year. I think over the next 2 or 3 years we might see something, but I can't see anything major this year. Lee, we don't talk about who claims, if that's okay, just from a commercial point of view. But there are some tools and platforms that do claim to support spotting phishing, particularly in that sense. So really quick geopolitical review. I was telling myself that I would stop at 4:30 today, but I've waffled as I always do. I like talking about this stuff, as you know. So this is 2025. So what we absolutely saw during the course of the year, geopolitical turmoil and nation-state cyber activity was certainly upped as a result of that. Nothing really changed in terms of the types of activity by different nation states, I would say. So Russia continued to focus heavily on political and military interventions, particularly in relation to organizations and countries that were in Europe or NATO facing, but a lot of targeting of European defence, which hasn't happened as much in recent years, and also political entities as well. So certainly central government and targeting of those. China continues to focus its efforts on economic superiority, so targeting organizations that have useful intellectual property. But also, I mean, we can't ignore all of the targeting of telco during the last year or so by certain threat actors associated with China. Iran and North Korea. Iran has improved its capability somewhat, mostly focusing on espionage and targeting countries that have imposed sanctions. Also, a lot of center of mass around Middle East and what's going on there. And North Korea has continued to be the driving force when it comes to making money on behalf of the state, particularly targeting crypto, and that has happened throughout 2025. As we move into 2026, crikey, we need to sort of have a different shift in terms of how we look at nation state and APT threats and how that applies to geopolitical influence. There's an awful lot going on in the world at the moment. For example, the stuff that's going on around Greenland and the potential tariffs, or at least the threat of tariffs that are being imposed, and this idea almost of economic warfare that's taking place. We know that we've seen Western actors leveraging cyber as a technique. There was talks about before the activity in Venezuela by the US that electricity stations were taken offline through cyber means. We know that the West is doing this just as much as we talk about China and Russia and so on and so forth. So yes, in short, we're likely to see nation-state activity ramping up off the back of geopolitical goings on. We're also seeing an awful lot more collaboration between groups. We saw this towards the back end of last year. I think I was talking about the sort of blurring of lines between different operators and cyber criminal groups being tasked by the state. So this is also happening country by country as well. So some evidence supporting Russian and Iran linked activity and Russian and DPRK activity as well. So yes, lots going on in that space. Obviously, a very more strategic type conversation as opposed to anything operational. But there we go. Lee, yeah, I think I've kind of just alluded to that. But could tariffs affect cyber? Yes, I think they could. There are a few ways, or there's some hypothesis behind what this could mean. Within this sense, could cyber be leveraged as part of a tactics to help impose or put pressure on? Yes, potentially. Could it cause the cyber criminal landscape and marketplace to adapt as threat groups and sort of dark web marketplaces and those sorts of underground marketplaces, how they operate as a result of tariffs? Yes, quite likely. We saw some of that happen in Russian type marketplaces as well when sanctions were imposed on Russia just after the invasion of the Ukraine war, just after the invasion of Ukraine, sorry. So yes, there is a sort of precedent for some of this as well. What else have we got? Robert Turner, possibly odd from no, I don't think it is, mate, because you're talking about cyber physical risk and the impact that's potentially having. Yes, absolutely. That applies to this sort of geopolitical conversation that we've had. We've provided some advice around telcos and ISPs, for example, and the potential impact to organizations linked to those sorts of services, and how the geopolitical landscape influences whether a physical attack on that infrastructure could have an impact on organizations and what that would mean. So it's something to keep an eye on from a strategic threat point of view. If you are heavily reliant on an internet connection and you operate in one of these countries that is going to be potentially targeted as per some of the activities that's going on in the world, it's absolutely something that should be either on a risk register or being monitored by your threat intelligence team if you do have one. And then loads of comments and questions. It's great. Andy, the outlook feels like we need to do the same but quicker and better. essentially, yes. If I was to sort of try and drill it down, the focus would be on that. And the impact would be cost and resource to be able to do that. Yes and no. We're obviously seeing more tools that we can leverage from a defensive point of view. So while we talk about the threat from AI is absolutely there to enable us to do more and do it quicker and more efficient. I think threat intelligence, for example, can be one of those tools in our arsenals within the cybersecurity ecosystem to help prioritize where we put those efforts in. Um, but sort of talking back to the supply chain research that we did back end of last year, there's a lot of organizations who are confident in they know what's going on in their organizations, but the reality is they don't. So trying to identify those gaps and plugging those gaps in your knowledge is where I would say that there's quite a big route to impact there and quite a big return on investment if you were to prioritize those things. And last but not least, Edward, regarding power grids, interesting attack at the end of last year on Polish grid, where the underlying communications used to synchronize. I wasn't aware of that one. If that was December, I was probably having too much mulled wine at the time. I must admit, I had a nice long break in December. But yeah, I mean, we've seen regular attacks against energy, whether it be by nation state actors vis-a-vis Russia slash USA in more recent months, or whether it be cyber criminal groups targeting utilities firms and having an impact there. Absolutely, we see that. And then Molly, thanks for your comment. Not a question, but I read an interesting article which basically said we need to be getting the fundament. Yes, we do. And again, broken record, Matt Hull. We do need to get our fundamentals right. We need to get those basic controls in place. If we do the basics, we stop an awful lot of these things from happening. And this goes back to my point of opportunity. And I've not done this on purpose, I promise, but there we go. Threat equals the measure of the capability of the threat actor, their motivation, and in bold, have I spelled it right? Because I never write things right when I've put them in all caps. Opportunity. If we can reduce that opportunity by getting the foundations right, if we can do the fundamentals right, we reduce the overall threat level and then therefore the risk to the organization. So there we go. Sorry, a bit of a preachy session to the start of January 2026, but really wanted to sort of lean into the fact that yes, there are threats. Yes, these sessions I hope are still relevant and important, but from a strategic point of view, this is where I think the shift needs to be in 2026, and that's based on the learnings from 2025. 2025 was actually quite boring when it comes to new threats and campaigns and things like that. There was just an awful lot in the news because of the big impact of some of these type incidents. But what it all boiled down to was fairly basic controls, tried and tested techniques by malicious actors. And they're the things that we should be really focusing our efforts on as we go into 2026. There we go. What's coming up? We've got our annual threat monitor report, our flagship report, just summarising what happened in 2025. Some of the things I've talked about in today's session will be included in there, as well as some of the things I've talked about that will likely rear their heads in 2026. I am back in February, back to the usual monthly routine now after a little break in December. So our next session is Tuesday, the 24th of February, usual time, 1400 UTC. Hopefully that doesn't clash with too many people's school holidays, because I think the school holes around that point of time, certainly in the UK anyway. But there we go. I'll tweak that slide to make sure that it says 2025, not 2026 on it. Hopefully that's been of some use. Feel free to ping me any feedback via the usual feedback links. More than happy to take that. Thanks so much for your input today. It's been really useful and really insightful as well to see some of those polls. I will leave it there. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I will catch you in about a month's time. Bye.